Hello and welcome to the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles podcast. Each episode will bring you the latest news from the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles, as well as fascinating interviews with entertainment personalities, government leaders, and community advocates. St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles, where Scotland meets the City of Angels. Let's get started. Our co-host today is St. Andrew's LA member Anthony Arnello. Anthony is a SAG actor and entrepreneur in entertainment, specializing in both independent and studio projects, and has done ADR for both television and feature films, including Marvel's Spider-Man: Far From Home. Our guest today is Andy Nelson. Andy is a British sound engineer who has been nominated for more than 24 Oscars in his career, being the third highest nominee in Oscar history. He has worked on over 150 films and has collaborated with directors Steven Spielberg, Michael Mann, Baz Luhrmann, and James Cameron, to name a few. His resume of films include Schindler's List, Braveheart, The Batman, and Elvis, and received the Oscar for Best Sound in 1998 for Saving Private Ryan and in 2012 for Les Miserables. In addition, Andy has received numerous other awards, including 5 BAFTAs. Please welcome Oscar-winning sound engineer Andy Nelson.
Well, thank you, Andy. This is really cool. I've never interviewed somebody quite as you've done everything. Oh my gosh. I was like, I think it would actually be easier for me to count what you haven't done than what you have when I was going through everything. So, just to kind of get us started off, how did you find your way to being a re-recording mixer? And for the people that don't really know what that is, what is that?
So gosh, that's a great question and something I could spend a long time on, but I'll try and give you a briefer version of it. So really what happens as a re-recording mixer is that when the film has been shot and it's been edited, and the final process really is to make the soundtrack, because at that point the music's usually been written, all the sound effects are being sorted out, type of film it is, obviously, and all the dialogue tracks are being carefully crafted, and sometimes we have to replace them if there's noisy tracks or if there's a performance change that the director wants. So really our process as re-recording mixers is we blend all those together. It's like mixing a record, really, where you've got a band and a vocal and an orchestra. I mean, we're doing the same thing with a movie track. It's my job is always to handle the dialogue and the music, and then I have somebody usually with me who handles all the sound effects work, and we just work together that way. And it is literally just going through every scene in the movie, blending, making sure that we're hitting all the right moments, getting the dynamics right and the story correct for what the director's trying to tell us. And I started, when I left school at 16 in London and went to work in the movie theater. I learned to thread the projectors and show the movies in the movie theater in London, but I didn't know how they were made. So I kind of worked backwards, if you like. I went back and sort of learned how the editing worked, how the shooting worked, how lighting worked, things like that. But I kind of fell in love with sound, not primarily because of music. I was working with an editor that asked me to look up some pieces of music that might fit a certain set of images, and I found myself sort of falling in love with that process of what emotionally music did to images. And that's what kind of got me into sound. It wasn't the technical aspect. I'm actually the worst technical person you can imagine. It was all about what it did creatively and what it did emotionally. And that's how I kind of worked my way through this business and ended up where I am, very luckily. And I moved 2 countries to do it. I moved to Canada first, to Toronto, to work with a couple of directors there. And then I moved down to Los Angeles and never left.
You were in it. Yeah. Well, that's very cool. So when you're 16 and you decided I'm going to go work at the movie theater, what were your parents thinking? Were they like, our kid's nuts, or this is great?
No, unfortunately, I'd lost my mother when I was younger, so it was just my father. But he was incredibly supportive. He had no clue. He was a tailor. He had no notion of what I was talking about, but he knew that I was interested and loved it. And whenever I was at school in the last year of school, I was just on the stage trying to set lighting up or do something. In other words, I was always trying to do something that was going to be supportive of a creative side. Yeah, no, he was completely supportive, and I guess he liked getting into the movie theater cheap as well, maybe. I don't know.
That never hurts.
Yeah.
That never hurts. Well, that's awesome that he was able to support you in that, especially when it's, something that's not necessarily easy to do when you're starting out. So that's awesome.
Well, and no family connections whatsoever. I mean, there was nothing. There was nobody in my family that was remotely connected to the film industry. So it was definitely a departure. Yeah.
Yeah. So you just moved to Canada, and you just got rolling?
Yeah. I worked my way through. I joined the BBC television in London, and because I needed to kind of hone into what the craft was going to be and how I would learn that. And the BBC was a great place for that because it was a non-commercial company, still is. And so you had more opportunities in a sense, there were training opportunities and things. So I did that for 3 or 4 years. And then I went to a small independent studio in Soho. And that's where I really got my break, because it was really a sort of a TV, small movie theater type studio. And I worked with a director on a TV show. The director was Ken Russell. And Ken Russell was, at that time, a pretty big name film director in England. And he asked me if I would do his feature that he wanted to do. But he said you'd have to move to a bigger studio because he needed a bigger screen and, more like a movie theater. So I actually went down to Shepperton Studios on the outskirts of London. And that's where I basically broke into working on feature films. And it was through Ken Russell. And then while I was there, I was very lucky to work with Stanley Kubrick and Nick Rogue and Michael Apted and people like that, which was a great time for me. And then I got an opportunity to move to Toronto to work with Norman Jewison and David Cronenberg. So I jumped at it because I thought, maybe North America was the way to go for movies. And and my wife said, yeah, I'll come along as long as we don't go to Los Angeles. And then 2 years later, we're on a plane to Los Angeles. Look, I think if you're going to work in this business, you're going to end up probably in Los Angeles, to be honest. I mean, there's San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, London. London has, ironically, since I left in the late 80s, early 90s, London has now become a mecca for movie making. I mean, it's huge over there. And but it wasn't like that then. It was very cyclic. And I was worried that I'd had the opportunity to work with people like Stanley Kubrick, and thank God I did. I mean, that was an amazing experience for me. And I didn't want to lose the momentum, which is why I thought North America was probably the best place to go.
Do you remember the first movie that you worked on? Like the name, what was the name of it?
Yes, that was the Ken Russell film. It was called Crimes of Passion. And I think it was probably around 1984, something like that, 3, 4. Yeah, I remember it well. You don't forget your first. It's all the ones in between I've forgotten, but no, that was a big break. I thought I'd hit the big time. I remember thinking, wow, this is as good as it gets.
So can I ask you, especially since you say you remember your first movie, when you started that project, did you feel kind of overwhelmed with it, or by then you felt like you had a good enough foundation that it was just the next big thing to go for?
No, I was overwhelmed, definitely, very nervous, and I mean, I didn't want to screw it up, obviously. I was anxious that this would be the beginning of more. And the thing is that I think, I can honestly say to this day, I still get anxious. I mean, the first time the director walks on the stage, even if it's someone I've worked with many times, my stomach churns over and I worry that, it's all going to be wrong, or I'm going to be kicked off the project or something, I mean, I don't think you ever really lose that sort of anxiety. I've talked to other people about it and they feel the same way. There's a sort of sense of, sense of anticipation, of anxiety, but also excitement, because, you know, I look at every film as a brand new project. You know, it doesn't matter. They don't get old. I just love the process of filmmaking and watching something up on a big screen. I mean, I'm a big movie fan in the sense of big screen. I hope and pray it never goes away. I think the reason I fell in love with it at such a young age was, you know, I'd go into a cinema on a Saturday afternoon on a rainy day in London, and I'd sit down, the lights would go down, and up on the big screen, you know, I'd be in the middle of Italy or exotic places I would never have imagined I would ever travel to at that age. And so it's a transportative, you know, in that in experience. And I think it still has that effect on me very much so. And that's why I love it. It's not like watching something in your living room, which, you know, there's too many distractions. There's something really magical about being in a dark room, watching a movie with some people who are reacting to the same things as you're reacting to. You know, that's a great experience that, as I say, I dread it going away. I hope it never does.
Yeah. So when you go about starting this process, like your first go at it, first pass, let's say, you know, you just said that you really enjoy being in the dark room, experiencing the world that you're being put in. How do you start? Is that the first thing you do, or do you do something else?
So you know what, I'm not a big fan of reading scripts, because I tend to put the characters in my head and the places in my head, and then when I see it on the screen, I sort of go, oh, that wasn't what I was thinking, or I didn't think that person would be cast for this role. So I actually much prefer to wait until the film is been edited, ready, and then before I start the project, I'll go in and watch it. And you know, in some ways, I feel like I'm the first audience in a strange way, because I'm now going to react to something that is allowing me to create the track based on the experience that I get the first time I see it. See, the thing is, when you've been working on a film for a while, there can be a tendency to start taking things for granted. You start to hear if there's a difficult line of dialogue, you're getting used to it. So you're going to understand what they say. I'm the one who has to be the one to come in and kind of go, I don't understand that, so we need to think about replacing it. Or, you know, the music can't be as loud as you'd like, because we'll never hear what they're saying, even though you know what they're saying. The audience doesn't know, and I have to be that audience. So I kind of approach it like that, in a sort of very pragmatic style. But I'm also then looking for how we can make it very cinematic, very widescreen feel, very kind of evocative. It depends on the movie. I mean, it depends on the type of film. You know, when you're dealing with a film like The Fabelmans, which I did last year with Steven Spielberg. I mean, I've been very lucky to have had this is my 20th film with Steven, which is ridiculous. I mean, yeah. So we have a very, very long-term relationship now. And the reason I'm saying this is that when I approach a film like that, that's just pure storytelling. That's him sort of talking about his childhood. We're not looking to create a world, a fantasy world. This is the reality of that life growing up. So that becomes a much more sort of I don't mean simple, because it's not simple. It's still complex, but it's much a clearer path, if you like, to what we would do creatively. Whereas you look at a film like The Batman, and now you're in this noir detective world that's anything's up for grabs. You know, it's all about creating the world. So that's the thing. For me, it's how each film I approach has a different signature and a different requirement. So you find that out obviously very quickly, and then you just work within those sort of boundaries, if you like.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, you know, you talk about creating a world, and then also dealing with something where it's sort of they have the guidelines for you, like 1980s New York. We have an idea what that might sound like. Right. What about when you go to do something like you did the Whitney Houston movie, and like even Elvis, you know, there's the side of the actor learning to speak and do that. Do you thread in any other dialogue or any other like singing tracks from the actual artist, or how does that work?
Well, Elvis, now that's a great example, actually, because now I've worked with Baz Luhrmann 3 times. So I did Moulin Rouge with him back 20 years ago. So the Baz style, and he definitely has a style, I learned very quickly on Moulin Rouge. So when I saw, he showed me Elvis when he asked me to do the picture, and I ran it, I watched it, and I went right back to 20 years before. As soon as it started, and I thought, oh my goodness, it's Moulin Rouge on steroids, you know, because this is a whole different experience, but it's very Baz. So obviously the intrigue for me when I watched the film was, well, first of all, what a genius Austin Butler is. I mean, the guy completely created that world. I mean, he became Elvis, and having met him many times since and spent some time talking with him, he's just the sweetest, loveliest guy, and he really completely immersed himself in that role. So to the point where we used his vocals all the way up to halfway through the movie. The thing is, it's a movie about Elvis, so you're going to want to hear Elvis Presley singing, obviously. But the beauty of the film was that Austin was so good that right up to the 1968 comeback special, that's all Austin. When he does Trouble, that's all him. It's no Elvis whatsoever. And now he also continued recording live all the other songs in the film. But as I said, we wanted to switch over. So on the 1968 comeback special, that's where we go into Elvis's real voice. And that was a very, very tricky session, because 1968, it was all we had was a mono soundtrack from the live transmission of the show, off of a VHS. So the music producer and composer, Elliot Wheeler, took that with Jameson Shaw, who's another music producer down on, and they knew they had to embellish it. So what they did was they started to work on helping to create a better sound for the drums, better sound for guitars, pianos, but retaining Elvis's voice. And so we used some technology to try and extract his vocal from the background as much as we could. It's a tricky process because it quickly reveals itself that it doesn't sound great if you expose it too far. So what I was doing as a mixer, I must have mixed that sequence 5 or 6 times, because it took a long time to get right, where I could just get enough of his voice to come through without it sounding strange, and then fill in with the rest of the newer recordings of the band. And so that's how we did the 1968 comeback special. And then from then on through to the rest of the film, it's Elvis's voice in the songs, but there are better recordings. By the time we get to Vegas, for instance, there were multi-tracks of his show, so we could really work and get the sound much, much better. But that was the toughest part. And then obviously what we did, because if he goes on and off mic a little bit, we can interject a bit of Austin in there, because Austin was so good that we could put syllables in and it would sound just the same as Elvis. And then obviously when there's live drama pieces later in the film where he's sitting and talking and then sings something, that's all Austin, of course. It's only Elvis's voice for the main performances in the 68 and in Vegas. So, but truly Austin, yeah, he's extraordinary. I mean, the guy is so good. So that's how we kind of worked through all that vocally with Elvis. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I saw him on a panel, and he's great.
He's great, and he's so natural, and of course he has a naturally deep voice, and the poor guy keeps getting plagued with questions like, well, you still sound like Elvis, and he keeps defending it, rightly so, because he has a deep voice. He has a great soft deep voice, which you sort of assume that maybe that's him with his Elvis voice, but it's not. That's Austin, you know, so he'll probably live with that forever.
So you've done a lot of projects, and I know we keep saying that, but like I'm looking through, I have my childhood here, and you know, all the way up through like Blood Diamond, West Side Story. I mean, you've done so many different genres. You know, you have your Evitas and your, like I said, West Side Stories, La La Land, and then you have Saving Private Ryan. So what do you like? Do you like both? Do you like one more than the other?
Well, I think, you know, I love variety for sure. I'm drawn to musicals because there's something about them that's magical, and I get very excited. And because I handle the music and the dialogue, you know, it's just something extra special when it's a musical, because there's a lot of stuff to do. And you know, I was delighted when Stephen took on West Side Story. I knew that would be a terrific project, and boy, did we have some fun with that one. And yeah, going over the years, like you said, and Phantom of the Opera and Evita and Les Miserables, which I was very lucky enough to win an Oscar for, and, which was all live recording. That broke brand new ground by being completely live for the first time ever. And that Simon Hayes, who recorded that on set, did an extraordinary job. And yeah, that was a unique mixing job because of that, but it was incredibly fun to do. So I think I would always say yes to do a musical is you know, a good musical. I don't know if I would want to do all of them, but that's but then, you know, the variety is great. There's nothing better than a fantastic drama. I mean, I'm compelled to watch, you know, any 2-3 great actors reading a great script, even if they're just standing in a room talking. You know, I mean, if it's great drama, it's great cinema. So I like that. Action is great. I was never like a huge action junkie in that sense, and but I've done plenty of them, and they've been some fun shows. And but again, I think it's because I look at it more as story than action, if you like. You know, I mean, even the Batmobile chase was all story. You know, there was a lot going on, and there was some crazy sounds and crazy chase effects and music, but it's still story. You know, when you break it down to it's I guess I don't like kind of, you know, mindless action, if you know what I mean. I don't mind. I love it when it's attached to something that's completely story driven. So I think I think to answer your question, throw me a good musical any day and I'm happy.
Yeah. And well, everybody likes a musical. They're enjoyable to watch, and I would imagine, like you say, fun to work on. So very cool.
Yeah, a lot of personalities, mind you. There are a lot. The only downside from that with the musical is that you've often got a pretty heavy musical interjection, because, you know, when I did Evita and Phantom of the Opera, then I had Andrew Lloyd Webber there. Great, but he's not the director of the movie, but he is his music. So you get that kind of, you know. And when I did Les Miserables, Jean-Michel Schomburg, who composed the score, the original, was with me all the time, along with the producer of the Broadway show and the producer of the movie, Cameron McIntosh, who's a big name in the theater world. And then you got Tom Hooper, the director. I mean, I do get surrounded by some pretty heavyweight people during musicals, because everyone's protecting their kind of corner, you know. So whereas when you work with Stephen, for instance, it's just Stephen, and that's can make life a little bit easier for sure.
Yeah. So how much of your own creative voice would you say you get to put into your projects?
Well,
is it hard to maintain that, or?
You know, no, I don't find it hard, because I think you have to have a personality you just got to roll with the punches a bit and be respectful, but an understanding of what the end result is. But I've always felt for a long time that people hire me, and my belief is people hire me to have something to say. You know, if they don't hire me to just sit and press some buttons and waggle some faders around, you know. I truly believe they want something from me. And if I offer it and it's not what they want, then so be it. You know, it's their movie. I have no problem with that whatsoever. I don't get, but I mean, I'm never going to just not say something or do something that I think is, you know, the way I perceive the film and the way that I feel we could go as a possibility, you know. So I think the answer is yes. I'll always find a way to be in there creatively somehow. It may be a very quiet sidestepping process to get in there, but I'll find a way. Yeah.
Well, 24 nominations. I think you've clearly done something right.
Found a way.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Very cool.
So let's talk a little bit about the technical aspects of like sound mixing and kind of the multitasking involved with sound mixing. Can you kind of go into some detail about what that entails.
Yeah, I kind of do it a bit like a layering process, really. And this is my technique. Everybody's different. Everybody approaches things differently. I don't like trying to put everything into the pot all at once just to see, some people like to throw everything in and see what lands. And I actually don't go that direction. What I tend to do is I think of it a little bit of a pyramid, where I think of the foundation is, to me, narrative. Therefore, it's going to be a dialogue. Most films, it's going to be a dialogue heavy drive that I feel is taking us through the stories. Therefore, my first pass of the entire soundtrack is only dialogue. That's all I do. I go through, I listen to every single line. I balance it according to where I think it should sit on the screen. I maybe add some acoustic to things. Like I said, we will replace certain lines if the director wants to change a performance, or if there's an airplane going over and it's a period movie, then you want to replace it to get rid of the air, things like that. So there are technical ways you replace dialogue, and there are dramatic ways that you do it, or performance ways. And when I've done that, and I'll generally do that for the entire movie, although we break the movie up into reels, so that say a average movie is say 6 or 7 reels, 15-minute reels, something like that. So as I say, we would do reel 1. So I would do the dialogue to reel 1, for instance, first. Then the next step is I actually layer the music into that, because I figure that the music, even though we'll play around with the music, maybe sometimes the positioning of it will change, or the levels of it are definitely going to change. I feel it's a good way to represent what it's going to do against the dialogue, because generally if a composer's taken a scene and written the music, you're going to want to hear it, and obviously that's the way we start. Then the third, so now we're building the pyramid, then the third top of it would be the sound effects. And that isn't to say that the sound effects are any less important. It's just that the layering process allows for the sound effects side to understand where the music is, and mix accordingly. And then when we've got all those ingredients together, it's a little bit like a prep chef, handing all the pieces in. Then we start to do the blending and the balancing. And at that point, then, with the director, we'll be going through scene by scene by scene. And then, of course, we make major alterations to that. Sometimes we drop the music entirely. Sometimes we play music alone and take the sound effects down and all sorts of things. But at least all the ingredients are together. And that's the way I like to work, because I think that way we've kind of really given everything its best shot. Because like I said, if the other approach is to start with everything in at once and then try and work your way through, and I think it's, for me, I don't think you're giving everything justice to do that. So that's kind of, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of my approach.
Yeah, that definitely did. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah. So you've done all sorts of things, and a lot of them are very big budgets. Do you feel like you have more leeway with bigger budgets, or is that just the way your career has gone, or do you also like doing smaller, more independent projects still?
Well, I do love independent small pictures, because I love some of those films, some of the Fox Searchlight movies, and I just love them. The problem is a bit of here's the simple answer to that. I've got a very, very good room at the moment that I'm based in, and have been for years now, with a good crew. I use quite an expensive mixing console, because I believe that it gives the best sound, and I truly do believe this, that you get what you pay for in that sense. Mm-hmm. Once you've equipped a room like that and you've got a good solid crew working with you, unfortunately it doesn't come very cheap. So the problem then is, when I go searching after a little gem of a story with a low budget, they come a little bit cap in hand, and then we see what we can do to see if we can help. Because I do want to, I'd hate to exclude that, but it is hard to justify when you're sort of running a bigger studio, if you like. So it's a little bit like, the reality is, you've got to do a couple or 2 or 3 big pictures with a big, healthy budget to help offset when you do some of the smaller ones that you might just do at cost and help out, which I'm really happy to do, but you can't run a business if you do too many like that. So it's a balancing between the two. But I do like doing big and small for sure. And sometimes the little gems are just beautiful.
Do you feel when you're working on a project ever like this click where you're like, oh wow, this is something. This really got big.
Yeah, you get it. Yes, I do. And I think you can't ever estimate an audience. The truth is, and nowadays it's become really hard to estimate. And the box office really, or kind of since the pandemic, to be honest with you, has been really unpredictable. Thank God for Top Gun and Avatar. Whether you like the movies or not, they've injected some healthy money into the box office, which was sorely needed. So, but so when you're working on something, yeah, I think you get a sense if it's going to be something good. Again, I always use my first screening as that sort of barometer, really. You kind of get a sense of like, oh, this is good, this is really good,
Yeah.
And then other times when you know that there's a little bit of something maybe missing or I don't know, it's sometimes it's a little hard to gauge whether there's a performance thing that's not hitting quite right, or whether it's the way the picture's been cut together, or pacing. Sometimes you kind of sense that it could do with a little bit of help, and I don't know if the audience feels that or not, but we can, obviously, when we're working on it. But I can't judge a box office hit. No, I can't. But Braveheart was a good example. Yeah, I had a lot of fun on Braveheart. Mel Gibson in those days, oh my goodness, we just laughed so much. And he's such a good voice actor. I remember every time there was somebody in the film that you couldn't hear what they were saying, he'd jump up and say, oh, I'll record, let me put the microphone up, I'll do that voice. So we did it, and then he'd put on a mock voice and do something, and then I'd mix it in low and it'd be fine. Then somebody else would be missing. He'd say, oh, I'll do that voice over there, and he'd grab the microphone. And then there was a woman, and he said, oh, I can do that. I said, well, you can't do everything. You can't do a woman's voice as well. But, it was just funny at the time. I remember he was like a kid. And he hadn't directed much before Braveheart. I think he'd done one or two, but nothing on the scale of Braveheart. And yeah, we had a great deal of fun doing that. And that was the dear James Horner, who passed away a few years ago, the composer. But James actually got me that film. I'd never met Mel. I was in Hollywood, and I'd worked with James with Norman Jewison up in Toronto, and James called me out of the blue and said, look, I got this film, I'm putting you up for it, I hope that's okay. And I said, what? And he said, it's this film called Braveheart that's directed by Mel Gibson. And I said, sounds amazing. So God bless him, he hooked me up with Mel pretty good there.
Wow. That movie has an incredible soundtrack and amazing sound, so
and beautiful music.
Yes, indeed. So you've worked with so many people. Mel Gibson, Spielberg's like your buddy now, which is awesome.
Well, I don't know about that, but yeah.
You know each other. You've done quite a bit. James Cameron. I mean, all these amazing people. Is there a project that you've heard whispers about, or a project that you have in your heart that's like sort of your pet project or your dream project that has yet to come?
Well, there is one I can tell you about, but it's not a definite thing. But I'm sort of, I'm certainly, it's been on my horizon ever since La La Land. And in fact, I did have a meeting recently about it, and I think it's going to happen. And that would be the movie Wicked. In fact, there are going to be 2 Wickeds. I don't know if you knew this, but I don't know if you saw the stage show. I saw it, and I knew within 10 minutes it would make great cinema. It was so very cinematic the way it looked on stage. And, when I've done some of these musicals over the years, it's hard when you go and watch a show. Like, for instance, if you watch West Side Story on stage, halfway through after the rumble, the curtain would drop. You've had a devastating moment. You'd go off and you'd chat in the foyer and have a gin and tonic, come back, the curtain would go up and a big bright musical would start, right? That's the format. When you do a film, that's got to happen without that intermission. So it's sometimes it's a very hard turn to make to get you back into, you know, away from what would be end of Act 1 to go into the beginning of Act 2. And my understanding of Wicked is that they've decided to do 2 films, and this is common knowledge, I'm not giving away anything, it's been announced, just so that they cannot have the issue of the one big kind of, you know, how do you condense a movie like a show like that into a movie that's not going to be too long. So they said, let's just do 2 movies. And I think it's brilliant because, you know, why not?
Yeah.
So that's that would be kind of on my radar, if you like, because it's completely in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. That's definitely going to be amazing.
Well, they're shooting it now. They're filming now, and it's going to be released. I believe they've announced that it's at the end of 2024 and the end of 2025.
Well, that actually brings up a good question. How long does a project like this take you from when you get the first draft and you're looking at it for the first time to when you're finished?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. There's always, because of budget, I mean, you know, when they start a movie, there's usually a very clear cut. Here's the production budget. Here's the amount of time we've allocated to edit the movie. And here's the amount of time we've allocated to finish the movie and mix the soundtrack, release the movie. That there's a structure financially through all of that. And there's a procedure and a certain amount of weeks and times. Obviously, things vary and change depending on the type of film. But I would say the average for me, when I start, because I literally come on after the picture's edited, when they're editing, they'll do a couple of test screenings usually, sometimes 4 or 5 test screenings, depending on the type of movie. So there has to be a little mini temporary soundtrack made just so you can go and play it in the local theater in front of an audience to get feedback. You know, those are the test screenings that we see and them do around Los Angeles a lot. And the focus groups, you know, where they'll pick 12 people or 20 people from the audience to sit and do a more intense feedback session. And that really helps the filmmakers to know where they're missing a point or if somebody's confused and things like that. So those are built into that. I rarely get involved in those because those soundtrack mixes are just maybe 2-3 days of work, and they're often dotted randomly through the process, which means if I wasn't working, I could do it, but often I'm on another film and can't just jump off of it to do that. So by the time I come onto it, which is when we start prepping it, preparing all the tracks and start the full mix, generally speaking, I would say it's in the region of about 6 weeks work, sometimes longer. Now, when I did Thin Red Line for Terry Malick years ago, we started that in late August and I finished it in December. So there are exceptions to that, depending on the type of film, type of filmmaker. But in general, I would say in a general rule, you know, 6, maybe 8 weeks tops, you know, which is why last year I was able to do Fableman, Elvis, Babylon, Whitney Houston, and I ended the year doing the Air Jordan, the one that Ben Affleck has just directed. So that's why I can cram those into a year, because I'm really looking at 6 to 8 week blocks, and doesn't always time out quite so nicely as that last year did, but that's kind of the way it goes. Yeah.
And do you toggle back and forth between, like, will you do 2 projects at the same time, or are you fully in one and then you pause and move on to the next?
No, we can't. It's really hard. I mean, the problem, you know, obviously there's sometimes, you know, when I finish a picture and we start the next one, and then there may be a call to say they want to make a couple of tiny changes. Is there any way? So if we're not working 7 days a week, we might try and fit in a Saturday, Sunday to try and, you know, finish it off. I hate it for us not to be able to do that, but that's dependent on the film that I'm currently on being okay with that, you know, that once I start a picture, it's their time really, and I would never want to intrude on that. So, but if they're not planning to do weekends and somebody needs a little bit of help to finish something, then we'll jump in and do a weekend. And, you know, I'd rather have my weekend off, obviously, but that's life,
Yes.
right? That's life in the movie business.
You're in the movie business. You've done it for a while. What would you do if you hadn't been in the movie business? What do you think is your other career that never came to fruition?
Well, you know, I played guitar and I played music when I was young and loved music, as tied into what I do now. And I was playing with a guy that was a really good guitarist, and we were doing some of the pubs around London and things, you know, as you do. And my film career was starting to heat up a bit, you know, back in the early days. And I actually kind of made a decision that I would stop doing that because I didn't want to stop this guy from going on. And he actually did go on and have quite a good success with a band. And I didn't want to get in the way of that. And I wanted to, you know, concentrate on my film. So I stopped that. And I've never had any regrets about that at all, because I don't, you know, but it could have been the other way around. You know, I could have done the opposite and said, I'll just keep playing and see where it takes me. But I think it would have been something like that, or you know, I love stage as well. I mean, not acting, but I used to get a thrill working backstage with lights and sound and just, you know, I mean, just the live audience and oh my goodness. So I think it would have been something. I don't think I would have strayed far from the world in a way if I hadn't done this.
Always something creative.
Yeah,
Well,
or
great.
just that sense of showbiz in a weird way. I don't know.
So the Oscars are around the corner. You are nominated for 2 different films. Do you still get nervous about the nominations and winning?
Yes. Are you kidding? Oh my goodness, it's really nerve-wracking. I mean, I don't have. I think nervousness, when you know what you're in for, you get less nervous. And I've been there enough times, sort of, to be a little less nervous, just because when it's new, there's that whole nerve-wracking thing of like, what happens now? Well, I know what happens now. I've been there enough times. And I've got used to staying in my seat many times when my name wasn't called out, which is instantly disappointing. But at the same time, I just always look on the gratitude of being there in the first place. You know, I've always felt that to be in the final 5, you know, you get what, 300, and I think there's something like 320 films a year that they have to, that are you can qualify. And, you know, to be in that final 5. So if you don't get to the number 1 spot, who cares? You've been in the top 5. You know, I think I look at it as a tremendous honor and to be there. But yes, you do get nervous when they come out and they go, okay, we're going to do sound next. And the camera, there's always a camera in the aisle that comes wandering up and fight because they know where you're sitting, and the camera starts to look at your face and my heart starts racing because it's nerve-wracking. It's live television. And when I won for Les Miserables, the other 2 people I was with decided that I should be the one to speak if we did win. So I had my speech in my pocket, and I kept taking in every moment when the cameras weren't. I kept looking at it to read because I didn't want to take it out of I didn't want to read, and I didn't read when I got up there. I missed something out because, you know, you just stare into this. I can't tell you what it's like when you stand on the Oscar stage in front of a microphone. It's even now I'm starting to get nervous just thinking about it. So, but I didn't want to read, so I kept trying to memorize that. But this year, I've already decided that if we were lucky enough to get up there, I've had my turn at the microphone. I'm gonna give it to anybody else that wants it. So that makes me less nervous because I can just get up and have fun.
And what are you going to do after the Oscars? Are you taking a break? Is something already in the works?
No, I'm just starting Michael Mann's next film, Ferrari, which is about Enzo Ferrari, set in the 1950s. I've done a few films with Michael Mann over the years, and he's collaborated with him a lot. And this one, he shot this all in Italy, and it's great. Adam Driver plays Enzo Ferrari, and Penelope Cruz is his wife, and the footage is fabulous, and some great race sequences. And it's the Mille Miglia that crosses Italy, 1,000-mile race through Italy in those old racer cars that incredible looking cars. So yeah, so I'll be, as soon as the Oscars are done, I'll just get back at it.
So kind of wrapping things up here, what would you like to tell American audiences as to why it's important to support both British and American film industries, talented artisans like yourself?
Yeah, I think I would broaden it out to all artisans across the world. I think the thing is, it's just embracing everybody's talents. I mean, when you look at the range of films that are in the Oscars this year and just out in the cinemas in general and streaming, I mean, the talent from all over the world, when you look at All Quiet on the Western Front and the documentaries that are in this year, which are dynamite, I think it's about just supporting this industry and getting out there and getting back to watching things on the big screen. And whether it's British artisan, American artisan, Japanese, French, it doesn't matter. It's more that the business is supported and embraced for all of its diversity and uniqueness. So I think that would be where I would send that message.
Andy, thank you so much for this. This has been incredible getting to talk to you, and we're rooting for you. We're going to see you on that stage.
Yes.
You'll say your bit, and
Thank
got
you.
two up for awards and more in the works. So we'll keep an eye out for what you're doing in the future. And I know I have watched so much of your work, and I didn't even know it. So thank you
Yes.
for all the contributions you've made to the cinema and to this art community that we all live in and get to enjoy. It's really awesome.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that so much. And I'm so honored to be part of this and to meet you both and to just be able to chat and, give a little bit of my feelings about this business to everybody. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles podcast. For more information on the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles, visit www.standrewsla.org. And don't forget to like our Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube channels as well. Have a great week, and we'll see you next episode.